Welcome to the Biz Doctor podcast, my love letter to business owners the world over. I'm your host, Lauren Goldstein, award-winning business consultant and advisor fondly nicknamed the Biz Doctor by my clients. I help business owners who are burning the candle at both ends diagnose what is actually keeping them buried in the day-to-day busy work, and then formulate a treatment plan to adjust their business and team to fit them, so they can take a breath and a vacation and have more fun making a bigger impact than ever. So grab your favorite beverage and your earbuds, and let's dive into our latest episode. The number one reason why businesses fail is they run out of cash. One study showed that 82% of companies that fail do so because of cash flow problems. Here's the really surprising figure though. Only 40% of businesses are profitable, while 30% are actually continually losing money. Those figures are wild, especially given how hard us business owners work, which is exactly why I'm so excited for today's episode. Welcome back to the Biz Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Goldstein, and I'm joined in the studio by Jose Palomino. And today we're going to do a dive into the wild ride of revenue. Make sure you listen to the end because Jose is going to share some very impactful advice on how to break through the revenue plateaus. Jose Palomino, CEO of Value Prop Interactive, helps mid-market B2B companies struggling with sales growth and margin pressure sharpen their competitive edge to win more and better business. By empowering owners with winning strategies, marketing, and sales solutions, he has unlocked over $250 million in new growth for dozens of owner-led business-to-business companies, even in commoditizing markets. I hope you are as excited as I am for our chat, so grab your favorite beverage and earpods because we're about to dive in. Welcome to the show, Jose.
Lauren, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Of course. I'm so beyond excited to have you on the show because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, one of the biggest threats to business success is revenue, and I know you are an expert in that arena. And as my listeners know, I focus primarily on the back-end business in terms of existing customer revenue and profitability. So I'm very much looking forward to breaking down revenue and growth through a different lens. So to kick us off, why don't you share a bit more about your path and how it led to you starting with the work you do now with business owners?
Sure. Well, interestingly, right? So I started this business, the Value Prop, closing in on 20 years ago.
Wow.
And at that point, I already had a career arc in technology, operations, and sales and marketing roles. And I'd also tried my hand at a few businesses. And actually, it's interesting when you mention those stats, I've been that stat. So I appreciate that, right? So I understood what that means, that kind of daily, sometimes crushing pressure to make it, especially, and actually in two contexts. One is something more operational, more traditional business, and something that was trying to be more cutting edge or innovative. And that burns through cash even much faster. Because you're trying to do something new. And we'll talk about that, I guess, as we go along. So, that history came together, and then having also experienced doing things in larger corporate contexts where you have a lot of resources. So how do you play with these? You have a lot of toys, but now you're in let's say the lower end of the mid-market. You're a $10 million, $15 million company. You don't have a department of strategy, and you may have somebody who says they're a CMO, but they're not really a CMO. They're not. And head of sales is over like 2 salespeople, and that, if that. And so how do you scale these things that do work for larger companies down to smaller companies? And then, that goes all the way down to very entrepreneurial, where somebody says, I have an idea and I'm ready to mortgage the house to do it. I don't do as much work in that area other than my network. People who know me say, hey, Jose, I have an idea. Can I run it by you?
Yeah.
And so I get a chance to play even at that lower entrepreneur, real, what I call a real true bootstrap entrepreneur level as well.
I love that journey. And I think you touched on so many great things there, and especially the bootstrap mentality, because I think there's so many pros and cons. But I also recognize how when we try and build our businesses like a different business instead of our business, that's kind of where we start to fall off a cliff into places that we don't want to go. So I kind of want to start with you busting the myth of hiring more salespeople is going to turn into more sales. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love that. I particularly love that topic because So here's a typical challenge, right? Business owner, usually when I'm speaking at a conference or a business roundtable or something, I often talk about hitting the plateau. So business might be 20 years old. They hit 8.9 million, but they've been stuck there for like 5 years, right? For a long time. And you just can't get past it. So they say, okay, well, it's time to hire new sales reps. And my answer is always, well, it might be, but let's take a look at some other things before we look at that. Because maybe what's holding you back, it could be antiquated production, being consistently late on delivery, for example. Customer service, which, by the way, every small privately held business, if you were to ask for a show of hands, who has great customer service, that's what sets us apart. Every last one of them. I've never had somebody not raise their hand. And then maybe there's social pressure in a group setting where you have to raise your hand.
Right.
But the reality is, I say, okay, well, when's the last time you called your own 800 number? Just test it to see how long did it take you to get a human who actually wanted to speak to you and spoke to you with good information. I said, because I've tested many of those, in those situations, I've tested their 800 numbers, and you sometimes get hello, or yeah, that, or you just get stuck in some voicemail hell. And I said, listen, you only have 20 people working there. Why do you need this elaborate? You're not American Express. You don't need 18 buttons, to get to the right department. It's going to be the same person. You always need to talk to Larry. So just have Larry answer the phone. And so things like that are actually much more likely to be impediments to growth than the lack of one or two salespeople. Also, they might have one or two salespeople already on staff, and then I take a hard look at them. I had an owner, we worked actively for about 2 years, turning around their sales operations. And they had somebody that moved up from engineering because they were good with customers. That was the thought. Good with customers, which is often the only qualifier that a lot of people in industrial categories think a salesperson needs to have, as opposed to any actual sales skills. All right. So this person was vexing the owner. That's the only word I can use. For a year, just couldn't get anything done, nothing in the pipeline, wasn't moving the needle forward. But was a nice guy, and the owner was a nice guy. And I said, I'll just say the guy's name was Joe for the sake of this illustration. But I said, Joe has to go. And, Joe's just never going to make the turn. Either you find a role that's more appropriate for Joe. No, we're full on those. We don't need him in any other areas. But he's never going to make it sales for you. It's just not going to happen. Not this side of some major retraining and other life experiences. He may come back to you in 5 years and be good for you, but not today. He said, well, I can't get rid of Joe. But I said, but he's always driving you crazy. He says, yeah. And I said, so why don't you do this? Let's at least get rid of half the problem. What are you paying Joe? And it turned out fully burdened was like $80K base plus commissions that almost never got earned because Joe wasn't a good salesperson.
Right.
I said, come January, and we're getting near the end of the year. I said, come January, just give Joe a check for $80,000 and tell him to stay home. Because you're committed to pay him, but he drives you crazy when he's in the office, right? So at least you got rid of half the problem. And he said, I don't want to. And I said, right, exactly. Because that's what you're doing. You're paying somebody to drive you crazy. And it's not good for Joe either, because when somebody is not that effective, they know it. And they're usually the most miserable of all. So you can work out a humane plan. If you're a small privately held business, you can say, listen, Joe, you got 3 months. Figure out what you're going to do next, but it's not here. You can do that if you want to be that magnanimous owner. That's okay. That's in bounds. That's fine. So my point to answer your original question is hiring 2 new sales reps to just goose up sales. If you have problems with customer service, with delivery, with your actual product itself. And by the way, a lot of small businesses struggle with those things much more than they like to admit. So they haven't, the owner, I'll say to an owner, I said, you've been running this business how long? They say 20 years. I said, okay, your top 10 accounts. When's the last time you personally visited them?
Oh, what a good question. Yeah.
Just personally, just call and thank them for the business. They're your top 10 accounts. I said, well, they know they can reach me if they need me. I said, when's the last time you spoke to them, human to human? Do you even know who's buying for them anymore? Because possibly the person that you got the business with 10 years ago is no longer with the firm or retired or died, got replaced, any number of things. By the way, may have gotten a promotion that would be more advantageous to you if you had just stayed in touch. And those are the things. So Lauren, I like to dig in and find out what are the real issues that limit your growth. The lack of a salesperson is not typically the number one thing. It's sometimes number 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is you may already have sales headcount. So in that scenario, what I really want to see is, okay, what kind of, again, like, are they Joes that just
Mm-hmm.
aren't going to get the work done?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, do you even have a sales process? Like, do you even know how sales happen? If you had to go to the whiteboard and explain how your product got sold, other than the phone rings, we take the order, we ship the product. I said, well, that's not really, that's how orders happen.
Mm-hmm.
But how do sales happen in your world? And almost all of these businesses in these kind of mid-market are all in commodity categories. So my point there is every one of your customers and prospective customers already buy something in the category that you sell.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just wake up one morning and say, we need bolts for our machines. They've been buying bolts already, right? They weren't gluing it before. They were using bolts. That's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're buying wood or lumber, whatever the thing is. So whatever it is you sell, your category is already buying it. Do you understand how they buy?
Mm-hmm.
And Lauren, we talked about this when we got together a while back on my show. And just the idea that, it's not just about knowing how I want to sell,
Mm-hmm.
but it's knowing how my customers are buying today, because that's changed radically in the last 20 years. And that change is accelerating now. And most of these mid-market firms haven't even asked those questions yet. They're not looking at that yet. So yes, many, many things to do before you go out. And oh, by the way, they want to hire somebody, especially in that $10 million range company or anything
Mm-hmm.
smaller than that. They want to find Zig Ziglar in his prime for a 40K base, with
yep.
all upside. Because after all, if he had confidence or she has confidence in herself, she'd be willing to work on commission only. I'm saying, like, it's a profession, dude. It doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah.
You're going to invest for one headcount, fully burdened, year one. You're going to be $1.25, $1.50 into that headcount when you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your margins like? Will it support it?
Yeah.
And if you're like in a 15% margin business, you're saying you're looking for $1 million from that person to just break even.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, how will you make that happen? How are you doing that now? So anyway, maybe a little over answered that question, Lauren, but you got me going on something that I have a lot of passion for.
No, I loved it. And I want to touch on 3 things or maybe just reinforce 3 things. The first is why I love the way you answer this question is, of course, you're on the Biz Doctor podcast. So my clients and my listeners know that it's about finding the root of what is creating the symptoms that you're seeing in your business. So I love the way that you answered, because I've seen far too often people trying to solve a problem with sales or a new person without actually addressing that root cause. So high five to that. The other thing that I think is so important, and I just want to reiterate it, is when you have somebody that's not performing. The first place that I always look with my clients is it, I try not to put blame, but like, is it your fault? Did you onboard them correctly? Are they clear about their role? Are you being a good leader? Like, once we figured out that maybe it's not you and it's them, then we can have a different conversation. But I've seen so many of my clients just have exponential profitability leaps or leadership leaps or morale leaps when they let go of that anchor of a person that they feel indebted to because they started with them, or maybe, they were one of their first hires, or they feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
But when you, to your point, when you keep someone around that you're just paying to basically not work, you're hurting their confidence, you're keeping them from where they can really excel, and you're hurting your business. So I love that you brought that point back. So thank you. And the reason I have you on here is because you're so passionate about this.
Well, and just to jump on that point there, Lauren, because you hit on it, it affects your business, not just bottom line, like the financial cost of that person. It's a morale killer. Mm-hmm. Because everybody around that person knows that person's not effective. And here's what they're actually, the coffee, the coffee clutch kind of conversation is along the lines of, if you're the boss and your name is Mary, say, doesn't Mary know that Larry isn't doing the job? It makes you look like a fool, or worse, like you're irresponsible and you don't care. And they also know that this person may be making, sometimes it's in leadership positions, making more than they are. And it just feels unfair, in the general sense. I mean, it's human, right? It's just human. You say, like, this is crazy. Why are we allowing this? So it's a real morale killer. And I think it was the Brooklyn Dodger general manager who brought in Jackie Robinson, broke the color line, Branch Rickey. I believe this quote is attributed to him, which is addition by subtraction. So that's a very powerful thought, that sometimes you're better off moving somebody off the team because they block other people's development. They block other people's contribution. So think about that. And I'm not saying you have to be draconian and just, we're shooting everybody down, and I think you have to be an organization that's willing to work with people who are willing to work, who are willing to do the work, because that also builds morale. When I say, okay, well, this person wasn't in the right role, but we found the role for them and now they're successful. That's a great success story if you can pull it off. But when you're a small company, you don't have Siberia to put, unproductive workers in. You have 12 headcount, 20 headcount. You got what you got. They all have to be like pulling on the oars if you're going to make it down to your destination.
Absolutely. And the other part of this, to your point, is when you have people that aren't performing, that are being compensated, then it demoralizes your A players and they start actually leaving because they know that there's no point to high performance. And one of my most viewed blog posts ever was about rotten fruit, and how the analogy of rotten fruit in your team. And essentially, if you go to the grocery store and you get one of those really lovely looking, clamshells of raspberries, and you're like, oh, this is going to be great. And then the next day, half of them are moldy, and it's because you missed that one moldy berry. And the same is true for your team. If you don't cut out the moldy team members, then it just infects your team and creates the thing that when I come in as fractional COO, I can't ever walk this back, which is resentment. Like if somebody on your team is resentful, then they got to go. So as much as I could love talking about teams, I want to shift to another question, because you've said growth several times. I want you to define growth and specifically tell me from your perspective, what's the difference between growing and scaling?
Yes, I tend to put it in the category of like the maturity of the business. So for example, if you're an established operation, you should be looking for growth, steady state growth. And especially if you think about it, you have 20,000 square feet of production space. You have a 30-person staff. You have clients you have to keep happy right now to keep the boat floating. And you're maybe, 15 million top line. So you are not going to burn that house down to grow the next thing that's the future. You're just not. Not if it's your house securing the credit line, the SBA loans that go with that, and so on, right? You're just not. So that doesn't mean you have to eke out improvement. I think you can absolutely grow, 10% year over year. You can get on a growth path. You can be a much healthier business. Eventually, you are in a position to do some strategic acquisitions to grow, where you gain some capabilities, some key people, some additional book of business. And that $15 million business could become a $50 million business in X number of years. That's not unreal. But scaling is I think more appropriately in my mind applied toward more entrepreneurial ventures, things that are willing to risk more and they're really swinging for the fences. They're saying, I want to, so they might be at $1 million. They need to jump. They need to get to 10 to stay relevant. So they really have to grow. The 10% is not scaling. You want to be doubling that business for the next several years. And that means you're willing to take some risks, to be bold, and you need to drive it with a very fresh value proposition. So let me also distinguish that between growth and scaling. For a growth business, you need a differentiated value proposition for sure. You need to stand out, especially if you're in any kind of commodity category. You make machines, you're a contract manufacturer, you're a CPA firm, you're a law firm. any of those professional service firms. Those are commodity categories. There's a million bazillion companies that do what you do, at least from the point of view of your buyer. You may say, oh, no, they don't know. We're very different. They've never dealt with somebody like us. Okay, great. But the buyer who's out there in the market looking for something in that category, patent attorney, is going to look up in Google, patent attorneys near me. Or they're going to reach out to their network on Vistage and say, hey, do you know a good patent attorney? Because that's what you want. So they're not thinking, they're looking for a trustworthy resource. In most commodity categories, that's more what makes it happen. And so you have to find ways to create differentiation, even in that context of everything seems kind of similar. There are ways to set yourself apart. They're subtle, there's small changes. And we often refer to that as a competitive edge, Lauren. And what we mean by that is, and I love to use the example of Usain Bolt, who's the most aptly named athlete ever, right? Because, literally the fastest man on earth. And that's his real name, Bolt. I mean, that's just amazing, right? But when he wins, he's competing against the most elite runners on the planet Earth who ever lived. I mean, who ever lived, generationally, the fastest group of humans who ever lived. And he wins consistently, but he doesn't win. He doesn't lap the field. These are 100-meter dashes. He wins by fractions of a second. But what's fascinating about this, and this is what I always tell owners who are thinking they have to blow up the world. I say, okay, just remember Usain Bolt, when he wins by 10/100th of a second, which you can't even blink that fast, they give him the entire gold medal. They don't make him share the gold medal with second place and third place. He gets the whole thing. When you're competing to win the deal, they don't make you, deliver us half the machine. We'll get the other half from the other guy. They want the whole machine from you. Or do our audit if you're a CPA firm, but they want the whole thing from you. If you're in an architecture firm, they're going to ask you to design the building. So my point in that is that you need to find that's how you drive growth, always finding the competitive edge. And you're going to have to rethink that continuously. It's a never ending battle because as you make changes, your competition makes changes. Scaling, however, is you're trying to bring something to the market in such a way that they haven't seen it before. Ideally, something brand new, something that's new. So if you're a CPA service, for example, CPA, how would you scale a CPA firm? Well, if you're small, you're saying you're $1 million today, you want to get to $10 million in 3 years, something like that. You may package your audits very differently. You may do flat rate pricing. You may do a monthly retainer. Pay us $200 a month and we'll take care of your books and we'll do your year-end tax returns. I don't know what the right ideas are for that practice, but just it will sound very different. And it's the kind of thing that can catch fire. Now, why can't the mature company do that? A mature company can try. In my experience, it's very hard, even for the most sophisticated company, when it comes time to say, okay, this will cannibalize our current book of business to try this thing that's radically different than anything we've ever offered. So they end up doing toe in the water. They do it a little bit. And they don't do it particularly well, and they don't commit to it fully. So they do it half-baked. And it doesn't change the world. They said, well, we tried that experiment for that newfangled service offering, and we spent $300,000 on it. Yeah, but you didn't spend enough, and you never committed to it because you were afraid. And that's almost always what I see happen. And you go to very big companies. I mean, think about this. This is really mind-blowing if you really pause for it. 15 years ago, not even 15 years ago, if you opened a Sports Illustrated or Time Magazine, when there was people still, I mean, they were digital, but people still actually bought physical magazines, right?
Yeah.
One of the biggest advertisers in those magazines was Kodak and Fuji. And that was the mega battle for the dominance in 35 millimeter film. Because, man, that's the world. It's all about film.
Yeah.
In a space of 18 months, I mean, digital photography existed in the form of Canon cameras and so on, but it was the iPhone that ultimately killed film. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the irony of that is Kodak owned one of the very first patents in digital photography.
Oh, no. Really?
Really. They just could not make the shift. They couldn't embrace the shift.
Mm-hmm.
Another very good example, just seeing how big this even happens with big companies, room full of MBAs and Boston Consulting Group and, Accenture advisors. They have all these big brains in the room.
Yeah.
So IBM essentially standardizes and invents the PC revolution, right? Essentially, right? With the IBM PC. I owned an original IBM PC. So I know, I lived that dream, right?
Yeah.
And, but what was interesting about it, IBM as a company thought it would be a service line. They didn't realize it was the revolution. They were not going to get the scaling benefits. Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, has often pointed out that the biggest wealth transfer was when IBM chose Microsoft for the operating system and Intel for the chip, for the actual CPU. That as a result, most of the gains made with the IBM PC was it launched Microsoft into, arguably one or two biggest, most valuable companies on the planet Earth ever. And it launched Intel, which for a very long time held a dominant position in chips. And then IBM stopped making PCs.
Yeah.
So think about a $10 million company. How are they going to do that kind of thing? So it's very hard to say we're just going to double this company every year for the next couple of years. It's not that it's impossible. Intellectually, you could probably think of ways where, let's go and let's get a whiteboard together and we'll figure out ways to scale your business. Just my experience is then the sacrifices and risks they would have to take almost goes right against the grain of most owner operators of a business. Just doesn't feel right to them to risk it all because they just spent 20 years building to get to 10 million, right? So I think they probably will live in a more of the growth curve model and just continue advancing, maturing that way and so on. But the earlier stage business that has less to lose can say, you know what, I'm doubling down on my idea and we're going to make it happen. And that's where that's entrepreneurship. That's where great new ideas come up. And they have to do things differently as well. Because the idea alone, the whole idea of the better mousetrap, as we all know, Lauren, is it's a great idea, but you still got to market it. You still got to sell it. You still got to deliver it. Just the idea alone. There's a lot of great ideas. I mean, just think of the whole internet revolution in the last 20 years. There's been no lack of great ideas. It's been every great idea. And some of these things some of them are dumb ideas, by the way, but some are great ideas. And you get a movie pass, right? They raised $100 million and their big business, I don't understand this. Their big business model idea was they would buy unlimited tickets from the theater operators and then sell it on a pass basis. I'm saying, well, wait a second, the theater. So you could end up buying $100 worth of tickets and you're only getting $20. I mean, I may not be a mathematician, but I'm thinking, that doesn't get better in volume, right? And they burned through $100 million in 12 months and they went out of business.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And that was like quote unquote smart money, putting money into that.
Aye. It kind of reminds me of, so I'm showing my age, but Blockbuster had the idea of Netflix and actually could have acquired Netflix.
Sure.
And they said, no, it's just a trend. And now there are no Blockbusters.
There are no Blockbusters.
Yeah.
No, that's a good example there where, because they're too close to it, they see it. And that's a big company that does have the MBAs and the consulting firms advising them and so on. It's just hard. Look, the reality is no one has a crystal ball.
Right.
So you're always thinking as an owner, okay, can I improve my situation here and create more value, more wealth over time? Do I have a good thing going? Right. So that's the first thing. If you're stuck, and we've talked about this before, Lauren, where I almost always work is with the owner who's stuck.
Yep.
Who just says, I don't know how to get out of this. I'm like, it's like what bumper cars, where they get jammed up and they just can't move free, right?
Yeah.
They just, how do I get out of this? But I don't promise them. I say, listen, we're going to get you unstuck and we're going to triple the size of your company in 3 years' time. You're contract manufacturer for 30 years. You make things for John Deere and Caterpillar. That's not, but we can streamline things, find areas of improvement, work on your marketing, your strategy, your differentiation. And over time, you will get back to healthy, consistent growth.
Yeah.
That's not sexy, but it's really what many owners really want.
Right. Well, it's, at least for me, there's a couple of things that I want to touch on that you talked about. For me, it's not about the vanity metric. It's about consistent, sustainable business that's healthy. That's more important. And that's why I also think people like you and me coming into companies is so impactful, because we're an unbiased, unemotional person who can take a look at the business as a whole and say, here's what's not working. Here's what is working. So let's keep doing that. Let's do more of that. But also here's what's prohibiting you from having that sustainable growth, the happier employees, the bigger impact, etc. And I have a friend named Cameron who says that if the rate of change inside your business is less than the rate of change outside your business, you'll probably be out of business. And I think that's so true with things just changing day over day. But I think that can be overwhelming to some business owners. So I like to say it's not about, night and day change. It's about 2 millimeters. So my clients hear me say this all the time. The distance between mediocre and good is very large. The distance between good and great, as the book says, very big. But the distance between great and extraordinary and a legacy business is 2 millimeters. And so it's just those small tweaks to do things better, more efficiently, more profitably, that are really going to make the difference, which I think is a great segue to my last big question before I ask you my final two questions of, how do you break through those revenue plateaus? Do you need a systematic approach? What are the best ways to get off the plateau and back into some form of growth from the top line?
So there's a couple of, let me answer the question in two parts. One is, yes, you do need a systematic approach, because generally the company is asking that question or that's stuck has basically been run seat of the pants. All right. To a large degree. I mean, I'm not saying, and let me be really clear. People know their industry. They know their business. They're good business people. I'm not saying they aren't, but they haven't really paused. I'll ask a question. When's the last time you've had even a weekend retreat with your leadership team to plan next year's strategy? Yeah, we were planning on doing that 2 years ago. And then we tried to do it on our own 5 years ago. That didn't work. And when we went to hire a facilitator, they were too expensive.
Yeah. They're stuck in the reactive business instead of the proactive business.
Right. So that's the first thing. So that's one of the first questions I want to ask. And the other one, similar to the owner calling on their customers. So, well, let me back it up a step. So yes, I think there's an opportunity to look at your business diagnostically, systematically, what's going on in all the different parts. You have a process for that. We have a process for that. I mean, it's just, you need a process to think that through. What I find in most cases, what's missing is real crystal clarity on what my customer wants. I know what they order from me, but I don't even understand fully what problem it is that I'm solving for them. And why what I do might matter to them more broadly than the cost of what they buy from me. Right. So I know, for example, if I'm a law firm, I'm assuming that staples are pretty important at some point. It sounds dumb, right? Like staples. For lack, what is it? For want of a nail, the shoe was lost, and the horse, and the king, right? So you just, if you don't have staples, it's dumb, right? But you get the point. Sometimes it can be a little thing. So if you're selling supplies to a law firm, I want to talk to the person who buys supplies, who might be Gladys, right? Legal assistant, and say, Gladys. Great name. Yeah. I know you can visualize it, right? And say, Gladys, what makes a good supplier for office supplies for you? What makes it help? What helps you with your job, and what really ticks you off? And then also Gladys says, well, no one's ever asked me that before. I'll tell you what it is. What I'm looking for is this, this, and this. What really irritates me is when this happens, or I get a bill that's confusing, and you need basically a statistical degree to understand the bill. And by the way, I've seen these industrial bills. Some of them, it's like getting medical bills today, which are obviously they don't need to be as complicated as they are.
Mm-mm.
That's by design, but that's a side rant, right?
Yeah, side rant.
So, but anyway, so I think, so I would say getting unstuck starts with asking the question of your customers, what problem are you part of the continuum that solves? Like what problem area is that you're solving? What do they like when they buy in the category? Don't ask them what they like dealing with you, because everybody's going to be polite. I mean, unless you're totally screwed up, they're going to say, oh no, you guys are great. You're responsive. You answer the phone. And when you place an order, you deliver it. Like, duh, like that's, otherwise we'd be out of business, right? So that's not telling me anything I don't know. But what makes you choose one supplier over another? You might even say, if you're in a tight category, you might say, aside from price, what makes you choose? Because they're going to always say price.
Yeah.
So really, what matters to your customers? Start there. Too many businesses are stuck because they don't understand them. I worked with a client once that did production for larger companies. They did manufactured parts for them. And when somebody called to place a new order, they would prioritize the new order because they wanted to impress this new customer. Well, what happens, though, is they had a queue of work in process for existing clients.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
Right. So they added up the number of days late of all the jobs on the floor just to get a number. Like, it's a good metric, right? It doesn't mean any one job was, but it added up. It was a substantial number. It was in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days late.
Oh, my heavens.
Yeah. So any one job might be 30 days late, 20 days late, but I said, well, so how's that working for your repeat business? Well, not so well, right? Or for them to send you a different part to make, right? Not so well. So it has nothing to do with price at that point. At that point, they just can't trust you.
Yep.
So they really worked out saying, okay, whatever else we're going to do, if somebody asks us, and here's the thing, somebody would say, I need this part by next week. What they were doing is saying, yes, sir, we'll do it because we want to get the new business. Instead, what they started doing is said, we'll answer honestly based on the queue. And they started telling people it's going to be 45 days, 30 days. And you know what? They still got the orders because no one else could do it in a week either.
Yeah.
It's like, it is what it is. I mean, it just, it's like somebody says, oh, I want to get married at that beautiful venue. That's my heart's desire. And I want to do it this coming July. And they tell you, oh, July's booked this year. It's going to be next year. Many couples will say, okay, I guess it's next year. And and that's what happens. People adjust. And they got that multi-hundred days late down to 0.
Good.
So they focus on that as a company cultural shift. But it impacted how they took orders, how they managed production, and what they made sure everybody had visibility to. And it was one number. It's beautiful. Like just one number, focus on that number. And it changed the culture and it made them more productive. And now they got more and better business. And of course, too detailed to get into this conversation perhaps today, Lauren, but just the difference between margin versus top line. So I've talked to manufacturers through COVID, and some of them, because of supply chain backlogs and so on, were booming. They were growing 30%, 40%. I remember I was in a conference with a number of business owners in manufacturing. And they were all like, oh yeah, we're growing 30-40%. We're like, just like the used car dealers, we're geniuses, right? So I said, oh, that's great. Congratulations. I said, how's your overtime? How about rush charges for materials? What's happening to your margins in this growth time? And they end up tracking, they grow this way, but their OPEX goes up at the same rate, and they're not actually making any more money. In many cases, they're making less money. Yeah. And in some of those categories, there's no loyalty on the customer's part. It's not like, don't worry, I'll help you make money next year. No, that's not true. That's not what's going to happen. So anyway, so I think systematically I'd start with the customer. And the very next thing I'd look at is say, okay, now that I understand what that customer's problem is, what they most want dealt with, and what they most value, are we aligned with that? Top to bottom. The days late is just an example of that. Are we aligned with that? Are we offering something that stands out in any way to somebody looking to solve those problems? If I can get I understand the customer and I understand how to solve their problem in a way that's a bit unique. Again, not revolutionary necessarily, but I'm going to really sharpen the edges. Like you said, those 2 millimeters. I love that example. If I do that consistently, a lot of the other pieces are going to fall into place because now my messaging sharpens up. My website communication, my content strategy is cleaner. My SEO is cleaner because I know what I'm emphasizing. My sales process now starts flowing more consistently because now I know what I'm promising, what I'm not promising. My customer success is working. My product development, new developments is all around those promises. I also know how much working capital I need, what kind of people I need. So my resources are there. And I probably will start mitigating risk in a significant way, probably moving off being overly customer concentrated. That's the other thing you figure, or at least overly product concentrated with one customer. And I've seen that. I know you have as well. I think you start thinking it that way. But those two things to me are the first levers to put your hands on.
I love that. I love that. There's two things that you reminded me of. The first is one of my very favorite quotes that I tell my clients consistently, which is unshared expectations are nothing more than premeditated resentments. And so
I love that. Hold on.
Right?
I got to write that down.
You got to write that down? I'll say it again. Unshared expectations are nothing more than premeditated resentments. Because when you set the right expectations with your team, with yourself, with your clients, everything gets better because you're not operating on assumption. And then the other thing that you reignited in me is the truth that in addition to the cash being one of the reasons businesses fail, most businesses fail from a lack of focus. And my job as, business consultant, advisor, fractional COO, depending on how I'm coming into a company, is to simplify. Because as your business grows and scales, you get more simple, get rid of those business barnacles, and really become, instead of a mile wide and an inch deep, a mile deep and an inch wide. So I love that you're bringing that back top of mind. And hopefully you guys can see why I just had to have Jose on the show. I mean, this has been great. So before I ask my last two questions, I'm sure those listening are asking themselves, how do I connect with you? How do I learn more about what you do? So make sure to stick around to hear his answers to these last two questions. But why don't you share how our listeners can further connect with you or get more of your expertise?
Sure. Thank you for asking that, Lauren. So the first thing is just you go to our company website, which is valueprop.com. That's VALUEPROP.com. Talks about the company, what we do, our successes, and how to reach out to us. If you want to reach me directly, and you can certainly find me on LinkedIn, but the easiest is I have a domain set up for that, Jose Palomino, just my name, one, all together, josepalomino.com. You can actually even get on my calendar if you thought you're ready to have a conversation with me. So thank you for that, Lauren.
I love that. Yes. And if you love podcasts like this one, Jose also has a great podcast. You want to tell them what the name is so they can go subscribe?
Sure. It's Business Growth on Purpose. It's on all the platforms, as you can imagine. It's also on our website at Value Prop, the video versions of that. But by all means, subscribe, enjoy, let me know what you think.
Perfect. All right. So you and I could jam on this forever, let's be honest, but we know we've got busy entrepreneurs listening. So it's almost time to close this out. We've covered a ton, but is there any last nugget or piece of advice that you want to make sure that you share with our listeners before I wrap us up and ask our very last question?
Sure. I think that the thing is, every one of you listening are in some sort of competition. It's a competitive space, right? So, but think about one of the most competitive spaces that has a ton of players is ice cream, if you like ice cream. Okay? And it's not only competition among brands, it's a competition among flavors, right? But there are people that just will not have any, like my son hates vanilla, right? My wife hates chocolate. So sometimes we get the Neapolitan, which has all three, that has strawberry as well. So that's a compromise. It's like, that's Switzerland, strawberry, Switzerland, right? So my point in that is don't get discouraged. There is, if you've picked out, and I think as Lauren just said, find that thing that you could focus on, become really great at that value, but make sure it's something that matters to the customers you think it should matter to. And you can, you don't need to, let me launch $1 million product line to figure out whether or not it's going to be well received. It's like, if you have customers currently, and if you don't, you have friends, you have people that you know that will take your call. Ask the questions, have conversations with people, learn what matters to them. And if you come from the industry you're planning to serve, be very careful that you don't depend on your own prejudices, your own belief system, because unless you're signing checks to buy products from yourself, it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters ultimately what buyers think. Your wisdom matters, how you apply that, but don't just satisfy yourself. Many, especially early stage entrepreneurs, have developed businesses around their interests, their passions, without checking to see, because you might be a unicorn. You might be the only one that likes that thing that way. Find out and always be learning.
Oh, such a great nugget. Don't be an echo chamber of one. Find out not only is the product that you want to sell needed, but are they going to pay for it? That's the other part. It might be needed, but are they actually going to pay for it? Oh, such a great nugget. Thank you. All right. Last question. I ask all my guests, what is a book you think every entrepreneur or business owner should read and why?
3 books come to mind.
Okay. Let's have them.
Classic from the 1930s, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Great book. Yeah.
I think anybody's trying to do, it's well worth the read. Some parts of it are a little anachronistic. I understand that. Might even be a little jolting culturally, but the essential truths of that are just very applicable to this day. If you're going to be doing something bold and you're going to be in an environment maybe where not everyone's going to see that you're doing the right thing or that you're doing the wise thing, you left your job to do that. That's crazy. Yeah. It's a great book of encouragement from that point of view. And there's a lot of good things to help you focus your mind, having the right perspective. The other is a great book that came out about 25 years ago by Brian Tracy, who's written like 1 million business books. It's one of my favorites, a thin little book, a quick read called Eat That Frog.
I love that book. It's such a good book.
It's a good book, right?
Yep.
So Eat That Frog really is about, it really it's some practical insights on getting things done and so on. But unlike Getting Things Done, which is a good book by David Allen, but Eat That Frog just simplifies it and says, look, you have 2 priorities. What's going to affect you the most negatively today if you don't do it? What's going to affect you the most positively today if you do it? It's a quick read, very inspiring. If you're building a business, you're moving a lot of parts, you have to have a good way of prioritizing every day. You have to make that a habit. Otherwise, you'll have more stuff at the end of the day to do than you have day left. And the third book, which I think is a great book for building teams that move forward and inspirational too. It's a book that came out about 10 years ago by a doctor out of Boston University Medical Center. His name is Atul, A-T-U-L, Gawande, and it's called The Checklist Manifesto. Highly recommend The Checklist Manifesto. He actually, and you may never have heard of him, but he actually changed in a substantive way the way medicine is practiced in the developing world and even in the developed world, all in the last 20 years as a result of the work he's done with the UN, his research. And you say, well, what does that have to do with me as a business owner? Just trust me on that one. Read it. It will inspire you and it'll encourage you and it'll give you some real practical insights on how to approach getting your business working in the right way for you.
I love that. I've never heard of that book, and I'm a prolific reader. I read about a book a week, so I'm really excited to add that one to my Amazon cart. So perfect. I love all of those books and recommendations. So thank you again for being on the show. It has been such a pleasure having you and having you share your expertise.
Well, thank you, Lauren. It's been my pleasure to be here. Really, I love talking about this, so it's all good.
Yes, it's been great. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening in. If anything we shared sparked something in you, we'd love for you to rate and review our show. And of course, share this episode with your friends or other business owners. Also, I'd so enjoy hearing from you. So let's connect. Tag or DM me on Instagram at It's Lauren Goldstein or LinkedIn or wherever you hang out on the interwebs. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe so you're the first to get notified when our next episode is live and ready for your ears. Thanks again for listening. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Biz Doctor podcast. Now, I like to say that friends don't let friends WebMD your business. So if you're wondering what your next steps could be, here are some options for you. No matter what, head to the show notes or to my website, goldenkeypartnership.com, for some impactful resources to support you getting out from under your business. That's also where you'll find the links to learn more about our services and how we support business owners, just like you, who are ready to make the successful jump from business operator in the trenches to visionary business owner with more freedom and flexibility. All of that info is on our website, so pop on over to learn more or get in touch. goldenkeypartnership.com. Finally, if you love the Biz Doctor podcast, I'd be so grateful if you would share it with your friends and network and give us a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast.
This is Story Studio Network.